All right, folks. Thanks for attending today, and thanks to Sean and the whole crew at Aquashella for bringing us in here and giving a talk. My name is Joe Waiulo. Everybody calls me Joe Fish at the aquarium. I'm curator and co-founder of the Long Island Aquarium in Riverhead, New York. It's on the east end of Long Island, about an hour and a half outside of New York City. My talk today is going to be talking about the reef tank there at the Long Island Aquarium. It's 20,000 gallons, and just going over some of the history of the tank and the rebooting the system. So I do love reef keeping, although this picture does not make it look like I do. Sanjay, of course, always has a great way of digesting things down to, I had to trash a tank to get into this speaking engagement, but he only said it was 10,000 when it's actually 20,000. So, so this is a picture that's about 23 years old now. This was starting the reef tank back in June of 2000. And for those of you that aren't familiar with the tank, it ran for 21 years as a 20,000 gallon reef tank. For 7 years, it was the largest reef tank in this hemisphere and second largest in the world. And it was doing well. This is kind of at its height, and you can see how large the corals have gotten. Just for perspective, that's about a 10-foot long window, and that's 1/2 of the tank. But over time, things happen. I'm just going to read through this quick. I don't know if any of you guys are familiar with Bob Stark over at ESV, Bionic, and all those great products. Bob's the brother that I never had, and I texted him that I just was sitting in the dunes doing some photography, and I came to the conclusion that I wanted to reboot and restart my entire reef tank at 20,000 gallons. The best he could muster as a response was a thumbs up. It was pretty overwhelming. So this is now taken. Sorry, I got to compete with all this other. But this is the starting of taking down the 20,000 gallon reef tank, and we're going to get into why that was started. But basically, all the corals that I could reach from the top and high up on the tank were removed. And then the corals lower down were then staged higher and higher. The tank is 30 feet long, 14 feet front to back, about 7 feet deep. And this is the continuation of disassembling this tank that, again, has been running for about 21 years. And the progress of moving the corals from the lower levels to the upper levels. This is a top-down view as the tank was being dismantled. So the tank is lit mostly by metal halide, but a bunch of LEDs are on there now as well. And it has about 26,000 watts of light on this tank. So if your spouse or significant other complains about your electric bill, just tell them at least I'm not Joe. So that's a good way to go. This is on the west side or the right side of the reef tank. And a lot of those branch corals and things that used to be down low were all moved up to the reef structure. The tank itself was built with 30,000 pounds, of a quarried limestone rock, and then about 10,000 pounds of live rock on top of that. So in preparation for removing the fish, I removed all the rock that I could that was on the bottom of the tank. A lot of critters to remove from the tank, some more carefully than others. Here's removing some of the acros and things. A fair amount of fish to remove from the tank. Most of these guys were caught at night. You can just go in when your tank is completely dark and go in with a really bright flashlight. And you can jack the fish out at night like that. You can do that on any size tank, or go down the middle of the night and turn all your lights on. They wake up in a stupor, and you can tickle them out with some rigid airline tubing. And so it's a great way of catching fish at nighttime. Again, removing some more corals. You can see the halide lighting there. This was removing a lot of soft corals from the tank. They could either be put into a net and then lifted up to the surface. Tridacna clams don't swim very fast, so they're easy to catch. On the top left side of the tank, I had a large collection of Heteractis magnifica anemones, about 20 of them. And I wanted to minimize how much rock came out of the tank. So some of it was chipping away the rock and the corals. My trusty hammer that I've had for over 20 years. It's probably more rust than hammer right now, but it still works. So that's the top left section where a bunch of the corals have been taken out and the last of the anemones are being removed. Had about 20 of the magnifica anemones up there, and they all started from one colony years ago and had been splitting and growing. So a lot of those anemones were placed into buckets and then lifted out of the tank. So there's, 25 gallons worth of magnifica anemones. This is then diving in the tank. So I did as much work as I could from above the tank, removing as much as I could. But then it came down to having to go back in and do my dives like I normally do. Just for perspective, you can see the size of that gorgonia there. That gorgonia I've had for 32 years and was the size of my thumb when I got it. While I was diving, I was also pulling out a bunch of critters, and I'm working on some corals over there. And you can see the urchin's making his grand escape from the bucket there. And I'm not cognizant of it because I'm really busy working on what I'm doing. So for this sense of time, I will tell you that he does make it out of the bucket and heads back to the reef. Oops. A lot of the corals, again, we're talking about 21 years of growth in the tank. So a lot of the corals did have to be removed with hammer and chisel, actually removing as the chunks as possible. There's some of the gorgonia again. And then this is me coming back to my bucket, realizing that my urchin, is no longer in the bucket. So he was trying to make a great escape there. So he was subsequently caught and placed back in the bucket, carefully. Never touch a long-spined urchin, ever. You can do it once and you'll never do it again. Magnifica anemones make awesome hats. People ask, can you cry underwater? You can. You can cry underwater. This was a very emotional time for taking this tank down. Literally my life's work. So that was a very, very intense time. There were months of planning beforehand to prep for this day, or these days. Worked many late nights, catering. Thankfully, we have at the aquarium fed me and kept me fueled up and ready to go. And then we had to put the corals somewhere while we were taking the tank down. So this is a 12-foot diameter, 4-foot deep, one of our holding pools, and a bunch of MaxSpec LEDs. So thanks to MaxSpec for supplying the LEDs for over this holding tank. This is just the start of placing the corals in holding. Basically any tank behind the scenes at the aquarium. We're a full-blown aquarium. We have penguins, sea lions, seals, otters, you name it, we have them. So this pool here was used for corals at this time. Then I realized I was going to run out of room. So most of the gorgonia I just started hanging by twine, and that freed up a lot of space to put other corals. That's 2-inch fiber grade, so that's not egg crate. That's 2-inch fiber grade, just for perspective. Providing enough circulation on this holding tank was super important. And a big shout out to Abiz and Alex at Abiz for donating equipment to us. Phenomenal systems, phenomenal pumps. So back to the tank, and here you can see all that live rock that's up higher on this section of the reef used to be down in the sand. So as much fish as that could be removed at night or during the day was removed. And then I knew we'd have to drop the tank to get the last of the fish out. And I didn't want a bunch of rock at the bottom of the tank. So a lot of the rock in this tank is suspended off the ground with these big slabs. I can really not hear. The purple on the top right? Purple squareanthius, one of the males. And then what I did also underneath all this rock in different spots was I dug out the substrate to make these pools that would then just naturally, hopefully, collect fish as the water level went down. They would go into those pockets of where there was no sand. And that turned out to work out very well. So yeah, this is D-Day. So the week before I got to this point, I increased the photo period so that the lights would come on much earlier than normal. And that would wake the fish up, get them out of the rocks. And I would be feeding them earlier in the morning. Because as the tank was going down, I wanted to really minimize how many fish were going to stay in the rocks. So like I said, about a week before the actual water level going down, trying to condition the fish to stay out of the rockwork. And then this is like the point of no return. This is June 6th. It'll be 2 years ago this June. I don't know if you guys are war buffs, and June 6th has a significant day in our history. That's D-Day. So that was kind of my D-Day, was taking this tank down. And there's no turning back at this point. Like, all the prep work's been done. Lots of tanks have been replumbed. Holding tanks are set up, and it's go time. So, and then you get down to this point. So myself and the staff are in there collecting fish from the shallows. We knew we had gotten most of them out, but we knew there was probably still hanging in the rock. So what we did was I put 2 feet of water back in the tank, left that overnight. So any other fish that came out, and we got about 35 more fish out the next morning. So that was a wise move to do that. So yeah, here's the staff pulling out. This is not translating too well, and then you're left with this, 20,000 gallons worth of live rock and an 8-foot ladder. And as I was wow, this is really not, sorry about that, it's not translating well. But, so then you're just left with all this rock, and all the rock that was tossed up on the reef structure. It started looking like, if you ever saw a reef after a big monsoon goes through, corals and rock and everything are just tossed around and deposited, and if they land in a good spot, that coral is going to grow back again. Even if it's upside down, a little bit of tissue is going to reach back around. And, so after looking at this, I was like, wow, that looks like a reef that was hit by a monsoon. And well, basically it was. It was Monsoon Joe, and the entire reef structure was tossed about. This is a video of a very satisfying moment. So this is pouring about 15 gallons of very concentrated bleach into the tank after all the critters were removed. And this is with fresh water. And if I had the audio working on this, you'd hear a very sinister wah laugh as that chlorine was poured into the tank. And again, we're going to talk about why I ended up bleaching the tank. And this is what 20,000 gallons of a bleach tank looks like as you're bleaching it. So at this stage, we did mask the tank off from the general public. Again, this is not in my basement. It's not in your basement. This is a public display. The camera there used to go, it still does, it goes to Stony Brook Children's Hospital. It's a long-term care for children with cancer. And they get a wonderful live feed on a 20 by 25 foot screen in the hospital of the tank. This was not quite appropriate, so we did shut that camera off. So a couple of reasons. Let's start with why take down a 21-year-old tank? Well, we're like a big rusty battleship, and you try to minimize how much steel and stuff is around a tank, but there was some that needed to be removed. So that was reason number one. Things were being held together here and there with duct tape and zip ties, and so all these matters need to be addressed. There was some compromised concrete. I'm going to go through this section kind of quickly because this part of the presentation is online also, so I do welcome to go look. But the concrete was secured, painted, and then it was actually, all of this was encased in polyethylene sheet material, so the saltwater can't get to it ever again. There are some penetrations through the wall that had slight leaks. That was resolved by using some expansion foam that was then carved back down and then siliconed over. So there was a number of mechanical reasons to redo a tank. We're going to touch on biological. So certain things don't take as absolutes because there are no absolutes in anything we do. Except you can always count on Raj. That's one of the things. So Asterinas. All right. So they're not all bad, but they're not all good. And then it's how many. So my tank basically was having too many of ones that I do really feel predate on corals. Most of the time they're great detritivore and they do a great job, but in mass they can be a problem. So one of the reasons, there was no way to really control these guys in a 20,000 gallon tank. I don't know how many harlequin shrimp you would need, right? So not feasible. Another reason was this calospongia. It's an encrusting sponge. It's photosynthetic, and it grows over everything, and I've found nothing that eats it. And it'll grow over any coral, Galaxia, hydnophores, any coral. So it got to the point where it was so invasive that this was another reason to bleach the tank. So Aptasia and Majanos were easily controlled in a tank with fish, but they would not touch, and I don't know the Latin name, but we just call these curlicue anemones through the years. They would not eat these guys, and they were becoming a problem in the tank. They would migrate into the center of your big coral and then just kind of sting their way out. So another reason to nuke the tank. Then just the unknowns of what critters are in my tank for 20-something years that maybe have grown to some decent size and maybe eating some stuff. So I didn't find any of the jumbo worms. These guys were about 18 inches long and certainly causing some problems, but nothing huge was found in the tank. But again, just another reason to bleach the tank. But the main reason to bleach the tank were Palithoa anemones. And again, I'm not saying don't get Palithoas, but just know what you're getting into. These guys create the most toxic, again, not all of them. Some of them will create the most toxic compound known to science biologically. I had gotten sick several times from diving in the tank because of these guys. One time they knocked me out for 3 days. There are staff, not at our aquarium, but other facilities in Sweden that have had to retire due to neurological damage from Palithoas. There's that guy Julian Sprung. I don't know if you guys, up and comer down in Miami. I think he's gonna be something in the industry, but he gives a great talk on Palithoa. And just be really careful with these guys. Maybe grow them on a little rock, not on your main structure. Keep them on the side. But these guys will and can make you really sick. So then what was also happening was I was starting to lose fish from this Palithoa toxin. So once I was getting sick and concerned out of staff, other staff possibly getting sick or worse, plus the loss of the fish was like the tipping point, time to bleach the tank. So once all the tank is bleached, then I set myself a deadline of 3 weeks. Because again, we're a public aquarium. June 6th was the shutdown. July 1st, July 2nd was my goal to have saltwater back in there with some fish and some corals, because we have our summer visitation. So removing a lot of the substrate from the tank. So a lot of shoveling. This was like wet setting cement. It wasn't just like this really loose sand. And about 254 buckets were removed from the tank. There's a normal spade shovel on the right side there. Some areas of the tank had accumulated a fair amount of sand and copious amounts of naturally fragged and undergrowth of stony corals and acros and stuff. So it was quite a challenge to remove all the substrate. But here's a majority of the substrate is out. And then rethinking and re-aquascaping. the tank. I had an opportunity now that I didn't have, that I did 22 years ago when I reset the tank. So the other thing was rinsing down this tank and rinsing down the rockwork and stuff. And there's no bottom drain in this tank. So everything that you rinse down had to get vacuumed up and then a sump pump put into that wet dry vac and then pumped out of the tank. And I can't tell you how many times we opened up the wet dry vac and sumped out what was in there and then closed it back up and vacuumed up some more. But here you can see it's starting to take some shape. This tank has a polyurea surface, kind of the same material that you would use for your pickup truck bed liners. And I'm glad we spent the money back then because part of this tank looked brand new 21 years later, which was great. You can see here, nice and clean. You can see on the bottom there, I had placed gray PVC sheet material to spread the load of the rock because it was, even though these were huge rocks. So this rock, the base rock, 150 pounds per cubic foot, very dense. So there was a lot of work done there. And this gave me a chance to redo even some of that base rock and reposition some of that rock. So on the left side of this photo, there's a section that just didn't translate to the front as well as I was hoping. It was a nice little alcove, but it didn't translate. So I was able to then renegotiate that space and close up that space. And then this is looking at the right-hand wall. The rockwork eventually over the years was put up the side of that wall. But the base rock was about 3 feet off the wall. And I was like, all right, I can close this up. So I was able to push the rockwork out on the right side. And you can see some fiberglass rod here. And it's a great way of stacking the rock. So basically you hammer drill through your rock, whatever you're using, whether it's live rock or Marco rock or Carib Seas rock has holes already cast in it, which I just was working with this morning, and fiberglass rods. And you can really create a lot of great rock work very easily. Instead of doing these huge bases, you could just do these great big pillars. And if you're doing this on a larger scale, don't drill the centers of your rock, right? You can do a few centers, but then on the other pieces, drill on either side. Drill towards the edge of one. And then when you're stacking them, you can get a lot more dimension. Instead of just this one column going up, you can do a center one and then one off to the left and off to the right and things like that. So, but yeah, so here's the rock on the right side by the wet dry vac there. That's the right side of the tank. And this goes very quickly. You're hammer drilling through Marco rock or whatever. It goes very quickly. You can really accomplish a lot of rock work very fast. Get the height you wanted. And on this tank, I just secured the rods on the top also. And here it is. It's starting to take some more shape. So the whole right side I was able to push out. The back I was able to push over. And then the left side I was able to slide that over as well. So I was working. It was actually on my birthday I was working. And my son James surprised me with a visit from California. And that's my youngest son John behind him. And we were hanging out. And so they knew that they pulled me out for dinner. And I was telling them a story about how I had actually tripped one earlier in the day and fell into the tank. And I've never fallen into the tank in 20-something years. And of course, I picked the time when there's no water in it. So I was telling them the story and they said, oh, we need to reenact this. Well, all my sons are theater and musicians and actors. And so of course we got to stage this. So that explains this. So I had tripped up by the fan there. Whatever I was carrying, I just tossed. And instinct just took over. And not that I got knocked out, but when I came to, I was hanging like that. And I don't know how I got there. I have that memory of realizing, dude, you're falling. Like, all right. And then instinct took over. And that's the next thing I remembered. So thankfully, my birth date wasn't my death date because it was literally the same day. So this is, So of course they have to stage, and I did tear up my knee pretty good, but again, it's D-Day and we just tape it up and we just keep going. So again, you can see some more rock work on the left side and a big hammer and sledge and just chipping away at some of this quarried limestone rock. At this stage, we do have the windows blocked off depending on the day. During the day, we would leave them open. Public could see what's going on. It's pretty cool. But if you're having a wedding at the aquarium, this isn't the most aesthetically pleasing backdrop at the wedding. So we would cover them at night for the catered events. So the other thing to deal with on a 20,000 gallon, 21-year-old reef tank is the acrylics. So acrylics do scratch over time. Through the years, I have dove this tank and used pneumatic sanders to polish out the acrylics. When it's empty like this, that's a good time to take advantage because it is a lot easier. So there's the full length of the tank. Each one of those panels, again, is about 10 feet long. It's sectioned off into quadrants. So you've got to sand the acrylic down and make it look 10 times worse than it did. Feather out all the scratches and then bring it back up again. So here's a panel. So each section is done. So this is with, oops. So this is with the electric sanders and Trizac pads and polishing and bringing the acrylics back up. It is very rewarding. It takes a huge amount of time because you're doing this process probably with 6 different grits of sandpaper. And each grit, you got to do 5 passes with each grit. But then you end up with a new piece of acrylic, which is awesome. Again, hosing everything down, removing rock work. I did remove about 3 pallets of what was live rock from the tank also to open things back up again. And now I'm starting to think about different, doing little patch reefs here and there as it was coming down to the wires, what the tank was going to look like. That's a top view of the tank from the top of the protein skimmer. So about 26,000 watts of light above this tank. So this is the left side or the east side of the tank. So what I did was a lot of the stony corals, like big stylophores and things, just only the outer shell of that coral is alive. So a lot of those frags were broken off of, and then I left the skeleton back in the tank as live rock. Some of these skeletons had grown to 40 and 50 pounds of calcium carbonate limestone. And then this is the right side or the west side. So everything is opened up, but also your view when the tank is dry versus wet is very different. When you fill a tank, the view is gonna get magnified. Everything's gonna come forward about 30%, and it's also gonna go out to the side. So you almost have to exaggerate the view to get that same view when the water is back in the tank. So while you're bleaching the tank, I was still keeping a lot of tanks that were attached to the reef tank alive, but I didn't want any of the bad water from doing the tank. And I was thinking I could plug it, I could put some valves in. But what's the absolute way that I can guarantee that the tank water will not get into my holding tank water? Well, just cut the pipe. So pipe was cut and then just put back together with a Fernco. That's the surface skimmer. So there was a lot of critters to keep alive while the tank was being renovated. Coral View was very generous. They donated Philips Coral Care, the Gen 2s. Wonderful LEDs, I really like them. They're passive cooling, which is really nice. This is a 5-foot diameter tub that was set up to house the Magnifica anemones. A lot of coral vats, basically any tank that didn't have occupied critters in it was occupied by something from the reef during this time. So this is just in the beginning where like I said, a lot of the bigger corals were fragged on their way out of the tank. And this was a good day. This was filling it back up with salt water. So it was basically 3 weeks, no days off, many long days into the night, but it was worth it. And this is filling the tank back up. So this kind of gives you a view of what I was talking about, like everything comes forward. So if you look at the water line and you follow those branch corals that are underwater, when you follow them up, you see how much smaller they are and how much further back they look. So again, the view changes dramatically. But there you can see some old Acropora skeletons, some old Stylophora skeletons that are upside down. Because in the wild, if that big coral head got tossed like that during a storm, there would still be some live tissue, and then those corals are going to grow back to the light again. Because corals are really resilient. This is a little closer view. Again, you can see how just below water level, how significantly different it is than above water level. So we use natural seawater at the aquarium. We have a saltwater tanker truck that goes out. We got a 20,000 gallon holding tank. We truck our saltwater in. It is low in everything reef related. It's still good water, but it's low in everything else. So again, I give a shout out to my friend Bob Stark over at ESV and got his salt mix in to bring the salinity back up to where I wanted it and to bring up the magnesium and every other thing that we want for reef. So when the tank was reset, I was having an ammonia and nitrite issue. And that was due to just a lot of dead stuff in the rock that didn't get rinsed out. So I did have to grab some bio balls from our shark tank, set up a biofilter to deal with the ammonia and nitrite. And then once that cycled through, then I was able to pull that trickle filter off. And then it was repopulating the tank. And again, I was really wanted to be careful about not putting some stuff back in. Like no live rock went back in. I didn't want any palithoas back in my tank. And then this is getting the tank going again. So now I have 20,000 gallons of virgin sterilized rock. But I'm on a public aquarium, so I gotta get something in there and I gotta get things going. So I've gotta massage this thing back to life. I can't put all the lights back on because I would just have this horrible algae mess. So here you can see some of the initial diatoms that are growing in. So a big cleanup crew was initiated with urchins and snails. And you can see they do a tremendous job. And Richard Ross gives some really nice talks now on algae control. And a lot of times you really don't have an algae problem, you have an lack of algae herbivore problem. So making sure you have enough herbivores in there. Now they eat and they're gonna make a mess also and they're gonna defecate. And so it's not 100%, but you can see how they'll keep everything clean. And now this is looking back to the west side or the right side. There's some gorgonia. So you can see how green the rock had gotten. So I'd gotten through this brown, ugly diatom phase. And then this was like screaming green. Like this was like hurt your eyes green algae. Just more like an encrusting algae. But it was like, okay, what are the more easier corals that I have in holding that I can put back in, see how they're doing, and then I can stage it from there. And visually, these guys were big, so that these gorgonia were a great, one of the first additions back to the tank. And now I have to provide them with some light, but I can't do all the light. So it was an interesting manipulation of the environment to keep it aesthetically looking good to the public, but also not creating this massive tank of algae. So a lot of snails were employed, sea cucumbers in the substrate. This is a piece of rock, and that purple little patch there was like the first patch of purple coralline algae to show up in the tank. Happiest reef tank guy in the world that day. I was like, okay, I'm on my way. So I was taking coralline algae from other tanks around the aquarium. I was scraping that down and then sprinkling that coralline algae into the tank to help seed things and get things going a little faster. And then someone pointed out it was shaped like a heart. I'm like, you know what? You're right. So that was a good one. So back to the east side of the tank, or the left side, you can see I got some tridacna in there now on that platform up top. So I hung a max spec LED because these guys really needed good light, but I didn't want the whole tank brightly lit. So I did pick a few pinnacles of the tank to put critters that I could brightly light. So that's kind of the progression there. And getting some of the sorry, my video is glitching a little bit. Sorry. Well, if the video was working, a bunch of clownfish come down the tube, into their host anemone. Oh, there we go. That'll be happening shortly. And again, in the back, you can see some of the old coral skeletons. So these are beautiful clowns from ORA. And from what I know, they've never seen an anemone in their life. So it's pretty fascinating. These guys just shot down a tube and go right into that anemone. And I'm gonna go forward on the video. I can guarantee you they all get out and they all settle into their anemone there. Again, starting out with some, I hadn't seen these in many years and got them from a store up in Maine. I can't remember the store's name at the moment, but these yellow parazoanthids, I forget what they're called, but again, a nice starter coral is kind of a guinea pig just to see how things are going. Will they open up? Will they get comfortable? Some Anthelia. Again, I've got to put stuff in there that gives a little water motion for the public. It's also my test coral. So as Sanjay on a recent visit lovingly called them, my rookie mistakes. So they've certainly grown a considerable amount, and they've been relegated to different spots in the tank. But yes, another coral to be extremely careful of when you do put it in your tank. The first SPS went in, so postal lapord, just to see how that stony would do. And then I could start introducing other critters to the tank. Start bringing up some of the fish population. So some more nice fish from ORA. Sand substrate here. Julian sent me 2,000 pounds of his sand. You can see some sand sifting stars in there. Took quite a while for that sand to get inoculated, but it's a beautiful sand. So this is my first dive in the tank after resetting the tank. And I really wasn't thinking about it too much. I did move over to the full face mask because I was less likely to get zapped by the Palithoas toxins. So after I got out of the tank, I went to go do my normal routine of wash down and get this toxic stuff off of me, make sure it didn't drip into my eyes, which just, even a little drop could just make your eye blow up. I know that for a fact. So I got out of the tank to do that, and I realized I don't have to do that anymore. And it was just this, I didn't realize what a burden and how much that was weighing on me on every dive. Like, am I gonna get really sick? Am I gonna possibly die? Silly things like that, right? So that was a wonderful day in realizing that. And again, just bringing up the inhabitant population, the cleaner shrimps and things. And you can see the coralline is starting to take off here. So here's one of those stylos that I put down in the tank. So it's upside down. If you look at the very top of that big coral skeleton is the frag plug from the original coral that I probably planted 15, 20 years ago. And then onto that skeleton, I just glued more frags that came from that coral. And that's what would happen in the wild. That coral would get flipped and then grow. And here's some progression. I don't have the timelines on this, but this is the same piece. You see the stylos have grown in. I'm still keeping that frag plug clear, so I want to be able to see that frag plug as the tank matures. Rose bubble tips, again, beautiful, but something to be really careful of. So the front ledge is kind of an homage to early days of reef keeping that we did in the late 80s and early 90s. Mushrooms and zinnias and things like that. So one of the improvements that I did was Alex at Abiz. This is the, what is it, the A1200. So this pump can move 150,000 gallons an hour with an incredibly efficient motor. It's all plastic and titanium, even the pole's titanium. It looks like something that fell off the SR-71 spy plane. It's really pretty an amazing pump. And here's Alex on one of his visits. Extremely generous. This is a $20,000 pump that was donated to the aquarium. So I can't thank Alex and his crew enough for just saying, here, take this pump. But no matter what you do, the gremlins show up. So there's a bunch of Sanjay gremlins in this photo. This is what comes out at night when you're not watching your tank. Little Sanjays just pop up just to make your life even more difficult. So in rebooting this tank, some gremlins popped up. There's a great movie from 1954 called Them. Just go watch it. It's such great entertainment value. So as I was talking about my latest challenge, I kept calling them Them. And then one day it was like, wait, Them. I know that movie. So the critters we're about to discuss are them, right? So yeah, this is a scene from the movie. And this is how I felt in dealing with them in my reef tank. As if starting rebooting a 20,000 gallon reef tank wasn't enough, I now have them to deal with that I've never dealt with in 37 years of reef keeping. What are them? We're gonna get to that. So here's a red Monty cap that's in the reef tank. The lower right corner looks like a perfectly good red Monty cap. As you progress to the top of the screen, you see a little discoloration, some tissue loss at the edges. Also, it's starting to look like it's vacuum sealed. The coral tissue is really tight to the skeleton. And you think, oh, I have a bacterial infection or I have something else going on within the system. You could, but you're not. It's them. You have a post-lepora colony that's losing tissue. And you think, oh, it's a bacterial infection, whatever. Hopefully this video plays because it's them. So the bigger white dots that you see are the adults. So hopefully, I've got to get this video to play, so bear with me. There we go. So this is an extreme case, and I let it get extreme in a holding tank just for this purpose. So there's some rigid airline tubing. Now that's not sped up. This is real time. This is how fast these guys are. And they've denuded that entire skeleton of post-lepora. So I'm gonna try and play it again. So you'll easily see the big ones moving around. What I want you to try and focus on is some of the smaller white dots that look like grains of sugar. Those are the babies. These guys have direct development and are absolutely brutal. I've been battling them for, well, about 2 years now. And they're voracious. And yeah. So here's a very small fungiid, and there's, again, some of the larger ones on there. When they get to this stage, you can easily see them. But even seeing them, you don't think that that would be a critter that would cause problems. But they are. And this is them under a microscope. Armored white devils. They're just like, this is evil incarnate. This is the worst critter I've ever dealt with in reef keeping. Makes aquarium flatworms look like a vacation. So this is them. So what do? I've got a 20,000 gallon tank now where things aren't going as smoothly as I thought. My true feelings on them. This dates back to when I first realized I had aqua-eating flatworms in my tank, probably 15 years ago, would you say, was when they surfaced? Maybe a little less. So I would go in and I would hose the corals down with some fresh water to flush off the aqua-eating flatworms. And it really worked well. And then the fish ate them when they got in the water column. So I got ahead of it. So I was doing that with the hose also. I was disrupting, so I wasn't killing them. It was just disrupting their nesting and getting them off of corals. I hired on some pipefish, and they definitely helped with the recruitment of them onto corals. So there was some biological control. I was also the main predator, and I was winning battles throughout the tank, but it was starting to look like I wasn't going to win the war. And that's where you start thinking about different things. So some of the corals, and again, this is not translating too well, but this is just a basket full of a bunch of Monty caps that I would pull from the tank, dip in Revive to shake off all the big bugs, and then put them back in the tank and in a different spot. Because you saw those once they feel like their life is in danger, they will bail out as fast as possible into the rock. So you can't put the coral back right where it was because there's a lot of them in that rock. So it was, for a while there, pulling some corals out, dipping them, and then putting them back in. And it was working. So this is regrowth of the tank since some of the corals were replanted. Again, most of them went in as frags, most of these guys went in as frags. And stuff's been growing in pretty nicely. I've been going in, I was hosing them down, disrupting the populations, but I would still, like if I missed a hot spot, within a week or so, that coral would be really stressed out. But it was working to a certain extent. So this is the right side now, the west side of the tank. And pretty good success for the first year and a half of the tank being rebooted. Stylophores were growing to the point where I could frag them and plant those frags around them and let them grow in. It's a great way in any size tank to take your parent colony and frag it and put it around it. And you can get a larger colony very quickly. Just some eye candy, top-down views. Again, so them are still in here. This is still a very active war zone. They're still in here, and I'm ahead of them, but I'm starting to feel like I can't win the war. So good growth. Green Slimer, one of the easier acros, I could never grow in the tank. So now I'm starting to think, I was starting to see things in the tank that when I look back on struggles that I had with the tank through the years, and overall it was a very successful tank, but there were certain things that I just couldn't keep anymore. In battling them, I realized those guys were in the tank the entire time. And through a series of events, I stopped hosing as much because I got ahead of the flatworms, fish populations changed, yada, yada, yada. So, again, this is all taking place with them in the tank. Things are growing nicely, putting on some size. So, again, they were in there, but acro's growing nicely. Again, green Slimers. But if I didn't hose these guys down, they would get infected with them very quickly, and they would decimate a coral very fast. But the way they do it, it's kind of slow, and you would think, oh, I have slow tissue necrosis, or I have a bacterial infection, they're very efficient at what they do. Again, you can see the growth and everything's putting on some size. Mike, I still owe you that coral again. This was a table acro that I got from Fernando at Scripps. He just sent me a chunk from his tank. So you can see that's my sneaker, and those are 2-inch squares. That's the thickness of it. And this is it growing in. So again, them are still in the tank, and I'm getting ahead of them, but it's growing nicely. So I'm happy with the growth. So acros, again, things are growing, but then all of a sudden, so here's that post-Lepore, and you can see the white skeleton shining through there. And you think, oh, I have a bacterial infection, or there's some rapid tissue necrosis going on, or something's going on. And it's not, it's them. So these guys were one of their favorite foods. And I would literally use these guys as bait traps to trap these guys, pull these guys out, dip them, put them back. Again, not a sustainable long-term cure. Again, here's an extreme case. They wiped out one entire colony. And then you're looking at the other colony and seeing the tissue recession from the, Mike, I want that photo. And then you see the slow tissue necrosis from the base up. And you're thinking, oh, I have a bacterial infection, or those corals are getting shaded. No, it's them eating their way up the coral. Again, how do I feel about this? So what do? I decide I don't treat the tank with sugar. This is just for perspective. Milbomycin is the active ingredient in Interceptor. Interceptor is used by Justin Dorton, came up with it for red bug treatments on corals. It attacks crustaceans. It's actually a veterinary medicine that attacks stuff for your dogs. So within each Interceptor, there's 23 milligrams of milbomycin. So to treat my entire tank with pure milbomycin, I needed 1.3 grams Now, unless you're a drug dealer or familiar with a lot of things, us being Americans, we don't need to know how much a gram is. I was told as a kid in grade school, learn this metric system, everybody's using it. Here we are, right? So 1.3 grams to treat my entire tank with milbomycin. That's half a sugar packet, right? Just to put it in perspective. We don't think about grams of sugar. So this is my little, I'm not anti-sugar. I don't use artificial sweeteners. I like sugar. I drink Coca-Cola. But just be aware, this is just my little sidestep here. So within 1 can of Coke, there's this many sugar packets in 1 can of Coke. So anytime you see grams of sugar in something, divide it by 3, and it's going to tell you how many sugar packets are in it. So just be aware. Again, I'm not anti-Coke, but just be aware, because we have so much sugar in our foods. It's horrendous. Would you ever sweeten your tea at a restaurant, an unsweetened tea, and put 14, if you drink a big iced tea in a can, it's 3 times this sugar in one. So again, I divert, now I'm gonna come back. So I treat the tank with milbomycin. That's a scary time. You're pouring a chemical into your 20,000 gallon reef tank that's on public display. So I've got 20,000 gallons of warm water behind the scenes ready to go in case it hits the fan. I don't know why these videos are. So this is 5 hours into the treatment. Look what's floating at the surface. Those are them. So it was very fast, worked within about 5.5 hours. The regular amphipods that we like to have in our tanks at the same time were acting like nothing was going on at all. So these guys seem a little bit more resilient, and luckily them seem to be a little, maybe even I would dare say hypersensitive to the milbomycin treatment. So this is a really nice, healthy red Monte cap. It's actually much redder than this. This is in what I would call the death zone of my tank. If you put coral in this zone of my tank, done. This coral, so I have experimental pieces around the tank. Some I interact with, some I leave alone. This is one that I left alone in the death zone. And after the treatment, within weeks, this coral is, you hear a sigh of relief, and this coral is growing like gangbusters. Here's this green and red Monte cap. You can see all the clean edges, all the areas that were dead or either getting overgrown. Again, this is after the treatment. The corals that were doing well are doing even much better. This is that acro that Fernando sent me as that slab. So it's hard to see, but there's green chromis in this photo. Now, years back, I had these gnatheids. It's this isopod that would jump on the fish's gills at night, suck the blood out of the gills, and when your lights come on, they jump off and go back into your rock. You never see them, never see them. But you would have fish that would be suffering, would die, had torn up gills. So my Antheus and some of my, especially the chromis, had these really heavy respirations, and I thought, oh, maybe it's these gnatheids again. So luckily the treatment also knocks out gnatheids. Subsequent to the treatment, my Antheus are no longer hanging at the surface and gasping. They're down in the corals, just meandering and enjoying life. So I think there were definitely gnatheids in the system. Again, this is the left side, fragging the corals now. They're growing, and I can frag them. Stuff is again growing very nicely. There's another section with the green stylos and stuff. Here's a whole section with the purple milkas. So again, just taking a bunch of tips off of a coral, spreading them out over a section of rock, and just let them fuse together. Works to be wonderful. So I'm at the stage now where I'm actually I have to go in and frag the corals because they're growing into each other, which is a great place to be again after all these years. So a priority I'm giving to that Aquapora robusta on the right side. So I don't know if I don't think Paul is here right now. So this is a new light that I'm trying out with MaxSpec. It's their 600 watt. Oops, sorry, there should be another photo here, but. And then again, fragging again, this Seriatopora, so the robusta can take the precedent. Oh, okay. So here's the 600 watt MaxSpec LED, 14K. Very impressive light so far. And here's the tank. So this was about a week or so ago. So it'll be 2 years this June 6th that I took the tank down. And it'll be July 2nd will be 2 years since it first got saltwater back into it. So you never want to be content with a reef tank. You can be happy with it, but never be content. The minute you're content, corals will humble you and knock you down a few rungs. But I am pleased with the way things are going. So these bugs, I'm not saying run out and treat your tank with milbemycin. And I'm here the weekend. If you guys have other questions after the talk, definitely find me, track me down. However, these guys were in the tank for many years. When I look back and see what they like to eat first, how they like to eat things, they've been in the tank. I think these guys are in the industry, they're in the hobby, and they're flying under the radar. And something to really worth considering if you are struggling with certain corals, and it looks like a bacterial infection or it looks like something else, it quite possibly could be them. If your fish are struggling a little bit, it could be these gnathiids, and the milbemycin or the interceptor will take care of both of those things. Again, I'm not saying run home and treat your tank with interceptor, but be aware. These guys are in the industry. After seeing what they've done and how they do it, they are there. So this is the west side or the right side. So my fish priorities on the reboot, my population is still low. My focus is on the corals. I don't want to battle nutrients and make more work for myself, so I'm keeping the fish population low. But the majority of the fish that will go back into the tank are going to be all smaller. People love to see the unicorn tank, so I'll be getting a few more of those. And also, find me on Facebook or whatever. It's an open invite if you guys are in New York. Be happy to show you a tank. Mark Levinson, one of the guys visited, I gave him behind the scenes tour, and he called it a Melev. So if you come to New York, I'll be happy to take you around and show you the tank, and you can get a Melev, and we can do behind the scenes tour of the tank. Let's see, I'm coming to a close here, and so Bob Stark's in the back there. We call all of our parking lot deals. It's usually after hours. And that's when the cash flows, and Bob brings his goods, and kind of our Walter White moment. So I look forward to many more of these nights. A lot of thanks. So many people. Freaking Raj hacked my system. You can clearly see that at the bottom. Raj. Huh? I think that's all I got, and I'm under 53 minutes, so that's cool. Let me just, so this should say 2023 now. This was in 2022. I enjoy a lot of photography. This was one of the owls I was waiting for that day when I texted Bob. We have snowy owls on Long Island, which is awesome. So yeah, I'm ready for 2023 with my reef tank. If you guys have any questions, I think we have a few moments to do that. And if not afterwards, really happy to clearly just obsessed with corals now for almost 38 years. And and by the way, this tank is done with kalkwasser. Who knows what kalkwasser is? Okay, a few hands went up. Kalkwasser is God's gift to reef keeping. Ask me about kalkwasser. Everything you see there is grown with kalkwasser. I'm supplementing with magnesium, of course, and strontium and other things, but pH, calcium, alkalinity, and everything else is done with kalkwasser. So, does anybody have any questions? No? All right. Well, thanks for having me and thanks for listening. And if you're in New York, come on down.